basically gluten, what is gluten? Gluten is a protein, and it's a protein that's found in wheat, primarily wheat. Also rye, barley, and spelt, and sometimes it cross-contaminates, and you'll find it in other grains too, but more commonly oats. It breaks down into smaller pieces, and it breaks down into gliadin and glutenin. Now, gluten is used in cooking a lot of the times because it makes, dough nice and chewy and has that nice fluffy texture, that we're all used to. I don't know if any of you guys have tried gluten-free foods and it's kind of dry and tastes like cardboard, and well, because gluten is nice and fluffy, and so therefore it makes it nice and chewy. There's different gliadin types, and I put that in there because it's important to know if you ever do testing that there's 3 different types, and so not all tests will test for all 3 different types. So sometimes you may react to gluten, and the test says, oh, but you don't have a problem. Well, it's because they may not be testing all types of the pieces of the gluten. And here's just a picture of the molecules, and it makes dough nice and chewy. Over here, I just have a picture of gluten, what it breaks down to, and then what happens when we do eat gluten, and what it does inside of our GI tract. So inside of our GI tract, what happens is it breaks down, and it actually becomes a molecule that's very close to morphine. So when we eat it, it's almost like it has an opioid effect. It's like it gives us this feel-good kind of a feeling. And it does actually, that molecule, it does go to the brain. So very, very powerful molecule. When we are digesting gluten, we break down proteins with enzymes. There is actually a specific enzyme that you could take if you do have a problem with gluten. It is found in supplements. They do make that now. Actually, I have that here. So for any of you guys that do have a problem with wheat or gluten and you're not sure, this enzyme is found in this product here. I take it if I know that I'm going to be going to a restaurant, and even though I do eat gluten-free, I never know if there might be flour on something. I take it just as a preventative. I wrote on here different diseases that are related to gluten. We do know that it can cause autoimmune type problems. One of them is celiac disease, and actually it's pretty amazing. 1 in 100 people have celiac disease. So you think, well, gee, is it really that common? Yes, it is. 1 in 100, that's pretty darn common. And signs and symptoms, I'll talk to you about that too. There is also another, it's kind of like a spectrum. So at the worst end, there's celiac disease, and then at the other spectrum, there's gluten sensitivity. So in between there are people who have something called dermatitis herpetiformis, and how that presents itself are a little rash, like a little bullous, like a rash, where it makes like a little blister, and it itches pretty bad. So that is something that I actually have. Every time I eat gluten, I have this little spot up here. I thought it was eczema, but it correlates with me eating gluten. And then also when I had blood tests done, it showed that I was making some antibodies against it. So it can be a big rash all over the body, and it could just be small little pieces. And then there are people who are just sensitive to gluten, and I'll talk to you about those symptoms here in just a bit. And then there's people who actually have a true allergy to gluten. Their body actually makes an immune response, and they're actually allergic to it. All right, so these are the symptoms. Quite a bit, huh? So there's bloating, there's abdominal pain, diarrhea, constipation, headaches. That's one that you wouldn't think would be related to gluten. There's joint pain, skin issues, problems with focus. There's quite a bit on there. Anemia, digestive problems, and then irregular menses, hormone problems is another. In kids, you're going to see things like failure to thrive. You might see kids that don't reach their developmental milestones on time, and who knows, it could be a problem with gluten. Okay, so what's the problem here? What is actually happening to make all these symptoms present themselves? So what's really happening is the gluten is causing problems with the cells in our gut. There's damage that ends up happening to the lining of the wall of the wall, and then we end up having malabsorption. So then we don't absorb things like vitamin D and iron, and if we don't have those basic vitamins, then yes, we're going to see issues come up, right? On one of them, here's just a picture of the cell wall. So of the lining of the GI tract. On the left, we have what it should look like and what's normal. The lining should be, you should see finger-like projections. That's called villi, and that allows for a greater surface area of which to absorb all your nutrients. So what happens is we lose that over time. And I think Dr. Peachy will discuss with her diet also how her diet affects this as well. But anyways, what ends up happening is it flattens out. So on the right side, what you'll see is that the finger-like projections flatten out, and then we have white blood cells that kind of go into that area, and an immune response happens. It's like, oh my gosh, body says, oh, you're gonna get sick, we're sick. If your body thinks you're actually sick and needs to get rid of something, kill something off. All right, so are you sensitive or not? And some people say, well, I'm just sensitive, I don't have celiac disease. When I eat gluten, I just don't feel good. Well, there is a risk long-term if you are sensitive and you are eating gluten. Long-term down the road, some risks include things like osteoporosis, and then even in some cases, lymphoma. But that's, the other end. Gluten, it's not just found in food, it's also in our cosmetics. So shampoos, you have to be careful about looking, are there wheat proteins, in your shampoo? If you guys have questions about different brands, I use gluten-free shampoo in cosmetics. Grains, I think Dr. Peachy is going to talk more about grains and their effect on the immune system with her diet. But here, you'll find gluten in different grains because of the silos that they're storing these grains in. Oftentimes may have had wheat in it prior, and then they're putting in something like oats in it later on. Sometimes it's the machinery that they're using to manufacture wheat, then is used to manufacture, other grains. Also an imitation meat, I didn't know that. So I found out if you go and you eat sushi, sometimes there's that imitation crab that they have that's got gluten in it. So, and then it's also in food stabilizers too. It's like a glue, so it keeps things together. So what does a typical gluten-free diet look like? A lot of the times it's vegetables, meats, fruits, and then you'll see grains, substituting in for, wheat. And that could be anything from millet, buckwheat, sorghum. You might find, if you look at the gluten-free products out there, they just substitute it with a different grain. And then instead of gluten, what they do is they add these gums. These gums they can come from different plant sources, things like xanthan, tapioca, and arrowroot. And instead, those things make the sticky glue that then bind together the other grains. All right. Another thing to think about too is gluten. Wheat is fed to cows and sometimes to chickens, and so people that are incredibly sensitive, they can't even eat meat where they've been fed, wheat as it's the primary diet. So that's for some really sensitive people. All right. cross-contamination. So there was a study that was done where they looked at 22 packages of gluten-free grains, and they tested them, and they found that 9 of them were contaminated with gluten. The FDA says that 5 parts per million, 20 parts per million is the cutoff in order to label something as gluten-free. Well, some of these gluten-free products actually had 5 times as much as what the FDA says is safe. So even if you go to the store and you're buying something gluten-free, it still may have gluten in it, and then that damage is still happening to your gut. All right. So should you avoid gluten or not? You know, you can try eating wheat and then taking it out of your diet for 2 weeks, and then seeing how you feel, and then putting it back in again, and then seeing how you feel after that. And then that's one way to know. But the gold standard is actually to do a biopsy of your intestines. They put a scope down in there, and they look to see has there been damage done to the lining. There's also blood tests. I mentioned that to you guys too. And I can talk to you more about specifics another time, or maybe after the talk. You can ask one of us about, testing involved. But a lot of the times the test will come back negative, but you may still have an actual problem with gluten because the tests out there aren't that, specific. The only real way to know is doing a biopsy. And for the people who have the rash, you can do a biopsy of the rash, and then it'll show whether or not you have a problem.
Excuse me, doctor.
Is
Is that something that can be done when you have a colonoscopy?
They do it actually, it's an endoscopy, so they actually go through the mouth.
Okay.
Through that,
Okay.
yeah. All right, so, yeah, I put up some things on here to kind of talk about the test, but I don't want to bore you guys I want to talk more about the diet. But just to let you know, wheat it's very, very complex. There's 100 different components to wheat within itself. So if you're just testing one little piece of it, what if you're reacting to something else, another piece of the wheat? So that's why there's so many people who actually may have celiac and don't even know it, even if they get tested. I do have resources. If you need resources, we can give those to you as well. We can email those to you. All right. There's a couple of websites. There's a blog that has recipes on there if you guys are interested in trying out the diet. And then also different websites that talk about in detail what I just went over. Okay. You guys have any questions about that?
Dr. Fong, you showed the pictures of the intestine of the celiac versus non-celiac.
Mm-hmm.
If someone who had celiac and went on a very strict gluten-free diet, would their intestinal tract eventually return to more normal?
Eventually, yes. They did show that, yeah. In very few individuals, it does not. But in most people, yes. But the diet, again, has to be very, very strict.
And is it true that the wheat that's grown in this country is different enough from the wheat that's grown, say, in Europe? I've heard several times that people who go to Europe and can eat wheat with no problem, and they can't eat it here. Is that because our wheat is so hybridized?
Yep, we've genetically modified it ourselves by choosing, the wheat that is the most fluffiest, basically.
Okay.
I think Monsanto haven't they hybridized?
They're evil.
Haven't they hybridized it so that then the wheat we're always getting is really, really high in gluten?
Yeah.
So,
Higher in protein, it is higher in protein.
in general, so.
And I have a son that had a girlfriend that was in college, and she said that there was a process that we used to go through. We used to soak the wheat, and that gluten used to fall off or whatever. And they don't do that anymore. They leave the gluten in there.
You have to make more money.
So, yeah.
Yeah, the
So-
different enzymes do get produced in seeds and in grains, yeah, if
Yeah.
you soak them overnight. And beans as well, yeah,
Yeah.
to make it more digestible, you're exactly right about that.
Yeah, I'm gonna talk about that a little bit in my talk too.
All right, low histamine, have any of you guys ever heard of this diet? Do any of you guys know what histamine is though, right? You guys have allergies? Seasonal allergies? Yeah, boo. So basically, allergies, what's happening is, there's pollen, we breathe it in, and then our body makes something called histamine. So very similarly, histamine is a molecule and it goes through either the mucous membranes or into our gut, and then it reacts with the lining of the cells. The lining actually comes in contact with the histamine, and then a whole cascade of events happen. So usually it's an inflammatory response, and so when something, with inflammation, we may see things like sneezing, itchy eyes, and that's just the immune response happening again. We may see redness, like blood coming to a surface. And then asthma, and it's worse, we may see something like asthma. But I think what most people don't know about histamine is that it actually, it's not a bad thing. Histamine allows us to be awake. So if you take an antihistamine, I don't know if any of you guys get drowsy when you take an antihistamine. It's because histamine plays a role in us being awake. It also plays a role in sexual function too. They did some kind of a study where they gave these men a bunch of antihistamines, and then they had erectile dysfunction. So somehow it plays a role in that too, taking antihistamines. It has a role in our mental health as well, keeping us balanced. They did a study where they found that people who take antipsychotics actually have low histamine production. And these are people with schizophrenia that they did the study on. And then of course it acts as a neurotransmitter, a chemical in our gut. Okay? Kind of it alarms us. Alright, so nice pretty rash there. Symptoms that you might see with histamine production. Obviously itchy eyes, runny nose, sneezing, hives or a rash, and sometimes we'll see things like diarrhea, which can be really diarrhea with allergies. That's different. And then low blood pressure, like you wouldn't think, well, why would really blood pressure related to that? But yeah, what it's doing is it's causing all your vessels to kind of stretch out. Okay, so what does a histamine diet look like? Oh my gosh, it's a long list. So there are foods that actually have a lot of histamine in it, and then there are foods where if you eat it, then your body makes more histamine itself. So the rich foods are going to be things that are fermented. Cheeses, wine, beer. Do any of you guys have a problem with that? Cheese, wine, beer? Oh, looky. I can't drink wine. You have a problem with wine? Oh, cheese, what happens?
Just kind of feel yucky sometimes, but it's probably overdoing it.
What about strawberries or chocolate for any of you? Yeah, chocolate.
Oh, chocolate covered strawberries.
Take that away from me, oh man. But I actually had to do that. Vinegar, avocados, eggplants, mushrooms, spinach, tomatoes, cherries, pineapples, citrus.
I have a problem with pineapple.
Do you?
My mouth gets itchy if I eat too much.
And then other foods that release histamine: bananas, eggs, fish.
Is it good or not good?
These are things that if you have problems with allergies to begin with, if you eat a lot of this, it'll increase more production of histamine and make your allergies worse. So this is actually a good diet for people who have seasonal allergies, or if you have problems with rashes or hives in general. It's a good diet to stick to. A lot of people have seasonal allergies though, so. I mean, you could take an antihistamine, but then all those little side effects that I just told you about, you'd have to deal with that too. This is a very simple way to deal with allergies without having to take antihistamines. There are some bacteria that cause histamine release, so sometimes it's about maybe you need probiotics. Maybe you had an infection in the past and your stomach bugs are still kind of imbalanced, and so you need to balance that out. Because there are bacteria in here that cause UTIs that actually also increase histamine production. So I don't know if any of you guys have had a UTI and then you notice afterwards, oh my allergies have gotten worse. So just something to think about. Histamine, it's broken down by, again, an enzyme. A lot of the, that's something that we can find. There's this product now that has that in it, which could be something to take if you do have problems with allergies. So. And that's just the picture again. So why would we want to avoid histamine? If there is way too much histamine, again, it could damage the lining and then cause this whole inflammatory process to occur. We don't want to be constantly inflamed, because then what that leads to are the symptoms I talked about, but then also pain. So for those of you that have chronic pain or know someone that has chronic pain, indirectly sometimes this is a really good diet to be on.